Today we are delving into the experience of the crew members aboard the RMS Titanic. And while most of the food that they ate was pretty simple, the food they prepared was definitely not. Like this sirloin of beef with chateau potatoes and béarnaise. So thank you to HelloFresh for sponsoring this video as we tackle the ship's crew and make one of the most complex dishes I've ever made on this channel. This time on Tasting History. Now, while most of the crew ate pretty simply on the Titanic, there were a couple who got to dine first class. Literally. Both Captain Smith and the ship's purser, Hugh Walter McElroy, had their own tables in the first-class dining saloon. And at the very last meal served aboard Titanic, the fifth course included sirloin of beef with chateau potatoes. Now, the menu does not mention any sauce that was served with it, but we know that it would have been served with sauce because pretty much everything was served with sauce. So as the menu was largely based on the cuisine of Auguste Escoffier, I looked through his recipes and it just so happens that he has a recipe for sirloin of beef with chateau potatoes, and he says it should be served with béarnaise sauce. Entrecôte à la béarnaise. Season and grill the sirloin steaks. Place on a long oval hot dish. At each end of the dish, place a bouquet of small pommes chateau, brush the steaks lightly with some light meat glaze, and finally border each steak with thick sauce béarnaise. So it sounds simple, but it is not. In fact, it is probably the most complicated thing that I've ever made here on the channel because not only do we have to make the steak and the potatoes, we have to make two sauces, the meat glaze and the béarnaise. Escoffier describes the meat glaze as a brown stock that has been reduced. The glaze is ready when it adheres to the back of a spoon in the form of a glossy coating. Though even making that brown stock to reduce is quite a feat, so I purchased brown stock and will let it reduce on low heat for about 4 hours until it coats the back of a spoon. And since it takes so long, you can pretty much let it do its thing while you make the rest of the dish. First, the chateau potatoes. Trim the potatoes to the shape of large olives, place them in a shallow pan, season and cook slowly in clarified butter until very soft and golden brown. Arrange in a deep dish and sprinkle with chopped parsley. So for those, I suggest using 1 pound or 450 grams small golden potatoes and a couple tablespoons of clarified butter or ghee. The hardest part about making the chateau potatoes is the shaping of them. You know, you're supposed to kind of cut them into the shape of olives, which I thought was going to be easy, but I was wrong. You start by cutting off the sides and the ends to make it into a rectangle, then carefully use a paring knife to carve it into an olive or barrel shape. And I'm not gonna lie, I got about a dozen done before my hand started cramping up so bad that I had to quit. And that proves that I am not a trained chef because I'm pretty sure that the cooks on Titanic could do like hundreds of them without batting an eye. So like the meat glaze, for the average home cook, shaping these potatoes is going to be rather time consuming, unlike making a meal from today's sponsor, HelloFresh. See, after spending way too much time shaping potatoes, the last thing that I wanted to do was plan another meal and then go to the store to get new ingredients. So HelloFresh is perfect because everything comes delivered to my door in sustainable packaging and all of the ingredients are already portioned out. And they have a large selection of dishes which has just been freshened up for springtime. With 50 weekly options, there's plenty of variety, and they have meals to fit everyone from pescatarian, vegetarian, and lots of quick and easy recipes for the cook in a hurry like me. Last night I made the white cheddar Wonder Burgers with Old Bay fries, caramelized onion, and special sauce. The burger was juicy and flavorful, and the potatoes were crisp and perfectly spiced. So if you want to give HelloFresh a try, go to HelloFresh.com and use code TastingHistory16 for up to 16 free meals plus 3 surprise gifts. That's HelloFresh.com, code TastingHistory16. And you'll be glad for a nice quick recipe once you've made this rather not so quick recipe from the Titanic, because we are about to tackle the most complicated aspect of the dish, Escoffier's béarnaise. Now, I'm not going to read the entire béarnaise recipe because it is rather long, but I am going to put the whole thing in the description, along with links to the ingredients and some of my sources, as well as my Patreon page. I'm also going to follow Escoffier's exact proportions, though I'm going to cut them in half because I'm not trying to feed a whole restaurant here. So for this recipe, what you'll need is 100 milliliters of white wine, 100 milliliters of tarragon vinegar, that's vinegar infused with tarragon, 2 tablespoons of chopped shallots, 1 cup or 15 grams of tarragon leaves, roughly chopped. He actually calls for a third of those leaves to be chervil, but for some reason that herb is like being boycotted where I live. I could not find it anywhere, so I used all tarragon, which is actually more common today, but if you can find chervil, use chervil. 2 teaspoons or 2.5 grams whole peppercorns, roughly pounded, a pinch of salt, 3 large egg yolks, 2 1/4 sticks or 250 grams of butter, 3/4 of a tablespoon finely chopped tarragon, and a pinch of cayenne pepper. So add the wine and tarragon vinegar to a large saucepan and add in the roughly chopped tarragon, chopped shallots, peppercorns, and salt, and bring it to a simmer. So you're looking to reduce this down to 3 or 4 tablespoons of reduction, and it can burn at the very end if you're not watching it. To help regulate the process, add a little bit of water, and it just kind of helps it, and it's not going to throw off the recipe at all. Regardless though, do it at a very low temperature just to be safe. It should take at least 20 to 30 minutes. Once you have just a little liquid left, pour it through a fine mesh strainer and squeeze out any juice. You should have about 3 to 4 tablespoons, and you want to let it cool completely. You're going to be adding the egg yolks soon, and if it is still hot, then they can scramble, and that's bad. The other pitfall to this recipe is not letting it get too hot while you're cooking it, because the sauce will split. Luckily, if it does split, there is a way to save it, and we'll get to that in a moment. But once your infusion is cool, pour about 3 tablespoons into a large saucepan and add the egg yolk, then set it over low heat and add a third of the butter, whisking it in until it's fully melted. Then add another third and whisk until incorporated, and then add the rest, whisking the entire time until it starts to thicken. Now this is the time when it can very quickly go from a nice creamy sauce to completely split. And the way that you're going to save that usually is by adding more fat, either butter or preferably an egg yolk. And it's usually because it's gotten too hot, so turn down the heat and then add that egg yolk and whisk it in, and it should bring the sauce back. Sometimes the problem is actually not enough water, so you can try that as well if the egg yolk doesn't work. Now if your sauce is not perfectly smooth, that's okay. Pass it through a strainer and then it will be smooth. But if it is nice and smooth, then just add in that pinch of cayenne pepper, a little salt if it needs it, and then mix in the finely chopped tarragon. Then set it aside as you make your steak and potatoes. And the potatoes are very easy once they're shaped. Just heat the clarified butter in a pan with a little salt and then put the potatoes in, moving them around every so often until they're soft and golden brown. This too needs to be done over low heat. It should take about 15 to 20 minutes to cook the potatoes all the way through. As for the steaks, you can do them pretty much however you want. Personally, I am grilling them on the stovetop with lots of butter and fresh tarragon. While it gets a nice crust on the bottom, spoon the butter over the top of the steaks and then flip them over and finish cooking. If your steak is really thick, like mine, you can butterfly it, but if you don't mind a really kind of a dark crust on the top and bottom, then there's no need to butterfly it and it'll get cooked all the way through and you'll just have a nice crispy crust. Now the hardest part about this is definitely timing everything because there are so many moving parts. You've got the steak, the potatoes, the Béarnaise, and that meat glaze, which I'm guessing you've already forgotten about. But if you were a cook on the Titanic, you wouldn't be doing all of this yourself because you'd have a whole brigade of cooks helping you. The cooks being part of the crew that we're about to discuss right now. The Titanic had over 900 crew members on its maiden voyage, and their jobs were incredibly varied, but they all fell under 3 departments. There was the deck department, which was made up of 66 men and included the captain, officers, and sailors in charge of the ship. The engine department, led by Chief Engineer Joseph Bell. It was 325 men and in charge of generating all of the power in the ship and making the ship actually go. These included the engineers, stokers, trimmers, and greasers, and had what I think has to be the hardest job on the ship. Most worked tirelessly in 3 shifts a day in the 6 boiler rooms, keeping the furnaces stocked with coal to keep the engines running. And because of their physical location on the ship, all the way down at the bottom, and possibly because of their place in society, they had the lowest survival rate, only about 1 in 5 making it onto a lifeboat. Now the 3rd department was by far the largest department, and that was the Victualling Department. With 495 men and women, the only department with women, the department was led by the ship's purser and was in charge of the hotel aspects of the ship. This was most everything that affected passengers directly. The cooks, waiters, bartenders, cabin stewards, cleaners, elevator operators, those who worked in the Turkish bath, the gymnasium, the barber shop, and usually counted amongst them were the 8 musicians and the 5 postal clerks. The Victualling Department was also in charge of most of the security on the ship, everything from making sure people didn't smoke in non-smoking areas, to making sure that life vests were worn and that the portholes were closed on the night of the sinking. Now the name Victualling Department originally came from the word victuals, which meant food, and food was still the major part of the Victualling Department. Every day, the ship's purser would meet with the head chef and his cooks to discuss the menus of the day. Then the storekeepers would begin procuring all of the ingredients for those menus. These 8 crew members were in charge of making sure enough food was loaded onto the ship at port and then stored at the correct temperature and kept ready at all times. They mostly worked in this labyrinth of rooms on G deck dedicated to the different ingredients. There were separate rooms for milk and butter, fruit, eggs, bacon, ham and cheese, meat, fish, and an entire room dedicated to mutton and another just to ice cream. If you're looking for me, I'll be in the ice cream room. They used a system of elevators to transport the food up to the first and second class kitchen, or galley, and usually just walked the food over to the third class galley, which was a lot closer. And in addition to supplying all of the ingredients for the passengers' food, they also supplied the ingredients for the crew's food. Now, I used to work on a cruise ship, and everyone seems to assume that I was up like eating at the buffet every day. I was not. I spent a year living mostly off of hot dogs, cereal, and cold French fries. And you know what? It was fantastic. But the only ones eating like the passengers were like the officers and the captain. And it was pretty much the same thing on the Titanic. See, the captain and the purser could eat in the first-class dining saloon where they each had their own table. They could also eat with the other officers in the officers' mess, which was probably served second, if not even first-class food. Most of the other crew probably ate more like the third class if they were lucky. Filling, but not fancy. The engineering department had their own mess down on E deck near their quarters and their work area. Since they worked in shifts around the clock, this mess was probably filled with engineers all day and all night. As for the Victualling Department, they didn't have a specific place to eat. It seems they mostly dined in the passenger dining rooms between meals, likely the third-class saloon. Though stewardess Violet Jessup wrote that when she was on the Olympic, the sister ship to the Titanic, their food standing in any available corner of a greasy pantry amid steamy smells and nauseating grease-strewn decks, eaten in the quickest possible time in order to get away. Now, as unpleasant as that sounds, Violet's position on the ship wasn't unpleasant at all. She was not only a stewardess, but a first-class stewardess. Now, the term steward or stewardess on the Titanic really has a whole host of meanings and could apply to many passenger-facing jobs, from the elevator operator to the person who took your luggage when you first boarded the ship. But the 2 most numerous stewards were the saloon stewards, essentially a waiter, and the cabin stewards, which is what Violet Jessup was. And in either of these positions, it was paramount that you tried to work your way up to working for the first-class passengers. Because while everyone received a salary, just like in America today, a majority sometimes of their income was based on tips. A first-class saloon steward could earn up to 4 times what their third-class counterpart made. Now, a saloon steward's position is fairly self-explanatory. Just think of the very best server at the best restaurant ever following you from meal to meal and being there for absolutely every bite and drink that you take. The cabin stewards, on the other hand, are something that we're not really accustomed to today. They were highly trained in the Edwardian style of service. Think Downton Abbey. And each one looked after between 6 and 12 cabins and their occupants. They were in charge of keeping the rooms clean and stocked with hot water and other amenities. Working in pairs, taking shifts, they watched over the cabins day and night as the passengers did not have keys to their own rooms. They also polished passengers' shoes free of charge, delivered meals to the room if a passenger decided to take their meal in their cabin, changed the sheets and towels daily, at least in first and second class, and for a fee they took passengers' clothes to the laundry on F deck to be washed and pressed. This was the only laundry that was actually done on Titanic because there were only 3 laundry stewards. Everything else, the towels, blankets, sheets, napkins, and tablecloths, were all washed on shore. Now, while a cabin steward's work wasn't as backbreaking as that person shoveling coal into a furnace, their schedule was probably the most grueling, as it often started at 5:30 a.m. and didn't finish until midnight, 7 days a week. And it's actually still that way on a lot of cruise ships today. Now, with that kind of schedule, Violet Jessup was on hand to rouse her first-class passengers and instruct them to don their life vests shortly after the Titanic hit an iceberg at 11:20 p.m. on April 14th. She wrote that, as she was from Argentina, she was told to also wear her life vest as an example to those non-English speaking passengers in second and third class. But she was also told that it was just a precaution, so once she had done what she needed to do, she went back down to her bunk. Soon after, another steward, Stanley, came down and told her, "The ship is sinking and you should go out on deck so you can get onto one of the lifeboats." Then she spent quite some time deciding on what kind of jacket she might need and if she needed a hat or not. Only then did she start up the stairs toward the boat deck. Halfway up, I looked down and waved to Stan. He was standing with his arms clasped behind him in the corner where he usually kept his evening watch. He suddenly looked very tired. Of course, Stanley knew that there was no space for him on any of the lifeboats. Violet describes walking past all of the now empty first-class staterooms. How strange it was to pass all those rooms lit up so brilliantly, their doors open and contents lying around in disorder. Jewels sparkled on dressing tables and a pair of silver slippers were lying just where they had been kicked off. When she arrived back up on the boat deck, she stood waiting patiently near the boats and describes how it was as people slowly began to realize that something was really wrong. First, when distress rockets went off, and then when third-class passengers who had already seen the water below decks started coming up on deck. And finally, when a mailman casually mentioned that mail was floating as far up as F deck. But Violet was able to get into a lifeboat, and just as it started to go down, another crew member handed her something, almost tossed it, she says. It was a baby, and she held on to that baby as the lifeboat went down, as they rowed out into the dark, and as they watched the Titanic slowly go under the waves. She held that baby all through the night, and all the way onto the Carpathia, which was the ship that came to rescue them. And only after a while of being on the rescue ship, while I stood, still clutching the baby in my frozen arms, a woman rushed up, snatched the child, and ran away with it. Now, Violet Jessup's story is not all that different from many other people aboard the Titanic. What is a little different is that this was not her only sinking on a White Star Line vessel. See, Titanic was the second of 3 ships in the Olympic class: the Olympic, the Titanic, and the Britannic. And Violet worked on all 3 of them. In 1911, when she was on the Olympic, it collided with the British warship HMS Hawke, which caused considerable damage, but it did not sink. Afterward, she switched over to the Titanic, and, well, that didn't go well. Then a few years later, she was aboard the Britannic during World War I, but this time not as a stewardess, but as a nurse, because it had become a hospital ship. There was an explosion while she was on board, probably due to it running into a mine, and the ship sank in just 55 minutes. But she was able to get into a lifeboat, but then had to jump out because the lifeboat got hit by the propellers and splintered it into a million pieces. What's weird is that not only did she survive that, but 2 others who were in the crew on that ship had also survived the Titanic with her. A stoker named Arthur John Priest and a sailor named Archie Jewell. Priest actually survived the sinking of 4 different ships. Now, of the different groups aboard the Titanic, the crew fared the worst by quite a bit. Of the 900 plus crew members, 685 perished. And on top of that tragic loss of life, the White Star Line then behaved, as you might expect, abominably. Any crew member who did survive got home to find out that at 2:20 a.m. on April 15th, as the Titanic sunk beneath the water, their employment was at an end and they would expect no pay after that moment. The brother of 6th Officer Moody received a letter from the White Star Line that reads a lot like a ransom note. "Dear Sir, should you desire the remains of your brother to be returned, kindly telegraph us, sending us a deposit of £20. That's over $2,500 today just to have his remains returned to England. And even then, Moody's body was never found, so I'm not sure whose remains they were planning on sending." And on April 30th, 1912, just 2 weeks after the sinking, the families of the musicians aboard received a letter not from White Star Line, but from the company that booked the musicians on the ship. "Dear Sir, we shall be obliged if you will remit us the sum of 5 shillings 4 pence, which is owing to us as per enclosed statement. We shall also be obliged if you will settle the enclosed uniform account. Yours faithfully." That would be a bill for the uniforms that their loved ones had died in. And on that sorrowful note, let us remember the brave crew members of the RMS Titanic, some of whom would have made this wonderful dish of sirloin of beef with chateau potatoes. So once your steak and potatoes are cooked, set them on a plate and brush the steak with the meat glaze. Add a bit of the Béarnaise sauce, garnish the potatoes with parsley, and serve. And here we are, sirloin of beef with chateau potatoes and Béarnaise sauce, as served at the last meal aboard RMS Titanic. I love Béarnaise sauce. That's ridiculously delicious. So there's this wonderful crunch to the steak, but then the inside is just so tender. And the sauce, you don't need very much because it is somewhat astringent. There is that kind of vinegar tinge to it, but it's also very creamy, and the tarragon just explodes. The flavor just explodes. It's absolutely wonderful. Also, don't neglect the meat glaze. It seems very simple, but it adds this wonderful richness to the flavor. It's like steak squared. Now for the potatoes that took me forever to carve this little thing, let's give that a shot. So soft and buttery. The fact that it's like cooked in the clarified butter or the ghee, that's fantastic. That's pretty much going to be the only way that I make potatoes from now on, actually. So yeah, it is a lot of work, this meal, but it is definitely worth it. Now, for more on Titanic's crew, watch this video, which is about the baker who survived because he got drunk, and this playlist where I'm putting all the Titanic videos. And I will see you next time on Tasting History.